So Joel Mowchenko manages his family's organic grain and cattle farm near Mossback, Saskatchewan, in Treaty 4 territory. He's passionate about local food systems and has experimented with various means of getting their farm products directly to local folk, including selling to local stores, restaurants, and farmers markets, even going so far as to venture into the restaurant business himself. He first connected with the Treaty Land Sharing Network in the fall of 2019 and has since attended several network events, registered his farm with the network, and hosted a native prairie tour in 2020. Joel, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. And I do really appreciate you accommodating me, and my apologies to Celeste for butting in line there. But yes, thank you so much. It is a real pleasure to be here today to talk about my involvement with the Treaty Land Sharing Network. And I do apologize that I need to sign off shortly after my presentation for a previous commitment. But I am happy there are other members of the network here who will be able to field some questions afterwards. Naomi Bangessner and Nettie Weeb will be able to do that. And quite frankly, they can offer much more insight into the network than I can, having more of a leadership role. But in the time that I have today, I want to focus on my experience with the network from a farmer perspective. But before I do that, I want to give a little background info first, just to set the stage. Next slide. The initial concepts and conversations about this network started sometime back in mid to late 2018. And if I'm not mistaken, the first somewhat formal gathering took place in February of 2019. So this was before I had become aware of the network. But as you can see from this slide, the network was formed largely in response to an increasingly difficult time for Indigenous people in Saskatchewan to access land and to practice their treaty rights, the treaty rights of hunting, fishing, gathering, holding ceremonies, and so forth. Next slide. This next slide gives a very brief overview of what the Treaty Land Sharing Network is. So simply put, it's a group of landholders, and more on that word, landholders, in a few minutes, who weren't happy with the way things were going and wanted to propose an alternative to the dominant paradigms around land ownership, concepts about trespassing, the government selling off of Crown lands, and so on. But exactly what this alternative would look like is something that the network has and continues to hold a bit loosely, allowing the connections and conversations between landholders and Indigenous land users to inform what the possibilities could be. And it's this non-prescriptive approach that was one of the aspects of the network that attracted me to it. So how and when did I get involved in this group? Next slide. It all started with an email. Back in October of 2019, I received an email from someone that I never heard of named Valerie Zink. And since then, Valerie and I have become friends. But the email was inviting me to attend a gathering in Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan in just a few weeks' time. She briefly overviewed the network and the goals of the gathering, which was to be a simple talking circle, including both non-Indigenous and Indigenous people, to share about what has been and what could be. There was a brochure attached to the email. I read it over and it was pretty obvious I couldn't say no to this. So I went to the gathering at the Treaty 4 Governance Center in Fort Qu'Appelle. It was a wonderfully simple event. There was about 35 people there, and I would say almost an even split between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, probably a few more of us non-Indigenous folks. But we went twice around the circle, listening and sharing. Then we had lunch together, and that was pretty much it. We went on our ways. But I learned so much during that simple event. And I think the biggest thing that struck me was the need to reevaluate the concept of land ownership that I held and my relationship to the land. You know, I found myself thinking, how is it possible to think that I or anyone could own land that has been there long before human beings and will be there long after we're gone. And then knowing that words matter, I've since tried to adjust the phrases I use, and I've noticed my concepts changing as well. I've tried to be careful not to use the word landowner, but rather land title holder or landholder or simply farmer. I've also tried to stop saying our land when talking about the place that we farm, and instead saying our farm. And sometimes I slip up and I choose the wrong words, and that's okay. I just try to do better next time. At the gathering, I also learned that no one there, whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, really had any clear idea what the end result of this land sharing network was going to be, or even exactly how land sharing would look. But the important thing was we had an idea and we wanted to work together to make it a reality, even if we didn't quite know what that reality was going to be. So what next? Well, the first thing I did was to join the private Facebook group for the network. I don't normally like to make plugs for Facebook, but once in a while it does serve to foster some positive connections. So this allowed me to get to know some of the people in the network and to read some of the articles that were being shared. Now, I can't quite remember what it was, but something happened in March of 2020 that made it more difficult for land sharing events to take place. But kudos to the network leadership team. That was my attempt at humor in my presentation. Kudos to the leadership team that they wanted to move forward anyway, even with the challenges of COVID. So they put out a call for landholders who might be interested in doing a virtual tour of their farms and posting them on the Facebook page, and welcoming Indigenous land users who might see something they felt they could use. So I thought this was a pretty good idea, and I do have a few skills with video editing. So I decided to go ahead and make a movie about our farm. So I did a short walking tour of the farm, highlighting some features I thought might be of interest to folks, and mostly focused on the native prairie pasture that's part of the farm. And I posted the video to the Facebook page in June of 2020. So during the video, I happened to stop next to a rock pile, and I did a little bit of commentary on my understanding of which piles of rocks on our farm would have been made by settlers, and which ones would have predated the settlers and like been put there by First Nations people. So this one, I said, because it was right next to a piece of cultivated land, I said would likely have been made by settlers. And some very diligent settlers at that, given that there were lots of small rocks in the pile, which is unusual. So I'll come back to this story in a little bit. After I posted the video, there was a positive response, particularly from some First Nation members of the group, and in particular, an Indigenous knowledge keeper who was very interested in the native prairie and that pile of rocks for some reason. So what emerged was a network event that took place on our farm featuring a walk through the native prairie, and that was in July of 2020. So I don't remember exactly how many people were there, but I want to say around 20 or 25. And again, a fairly even mix of Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Elder Murray Ironchild opened the gathering with a prayer. And then we had a talking circle to introduce ourselves. And despite the scorching heat of the day, folks were eager for more walking and less talking, or at least less sitting. So with introductions complete, we headed out to the prairie. And we walked. And we listened. And we learned. So this is Elder Murray talking, and I learned so much from him that day, specifically about the variety of sages and other medicinal plants and some of their many uses. Unfortunately, I didn't retain near as much as I would have liked, but I'm looking forward to more opportunities for me to hear more and have more sink in. So this is knowledge keeper Barbara Lavalle talking to a few of us. This is not the exact moment that I wanted to capture, but it will do for a visual to go with my story. So remember my story about the rock pile in my video. Barbara was keenly interested to have a look at this pile. And as soon as we got there, she said, this was definitely made by First Nation people. She pointed out that if you look closely, you could see that the pile of rocks, now much of it grown over, was longer than it appeared and ran along the entire edge and mouth of the coulee. She said this would have been used to channel buffalo down the coulee where they would have been hunted. She also pointed out that the rocks in the pile were all roughly the same size, which she said was another indication it was made by First Nation people. I was just amazed. I knew there were rock piles on the farm that were put there by First Nation people, but I never considered that this was one of them. And after having my eyes open to this, I've since found another example of this type of buffalo run in another part of the pasture. And I need to have Barbara back out to the farm someday because there's all sorts of things I want to ask her now that I've been looking with this new set of eyes. So the next significant moment in my journey with the Treaty Land Sharing Network was on July 15th of this year. This was the public launch of the network held at Mary Smiley and Ian McCreary's farm. And the other two folk in this photo are Mary Culbertson, the Treaty Commissioner of Saskatchewan, and Brad Desjardins from Fishing Lake First Nation. There was a media event and the Treaty Land Sharing Network farm signs were distributed for landholders to post on their land. At this event, there was also a pipe ceremony and another talking circle. Now, the fellow in the middle of this slide in the blue shirt is Lauren Kakataway. And I'd met Lauren before and learned that he was a First Nation artist from Regina. During the circle, he happened to mention that he was looking for some boulders for an art project and wondered if anyone had any. Well, I tracked him down afterward and said, yes, we have lots of boulders on our farm, and he was more than welcome to them. So this led to a few follow-up conversations and texts. And then on September 6th, Lauren and his partner Jolie and their 2 kids and 2 nieces came out to the farm to look at the boulders. So full transparency, this photo is not actually from that day, September 6th, but this is Lauren and Jolie's son, Shuntagesh, at our farm from the summer before. But anyway, on that day, on September 6th, 2021, that turned out to be the first official land sharing at our farm, because not only did they take a look at the boulders, they also harvested some sage to take back with them and to use for smudging. So I didn't think to get any pictures of them harvesting the sage, but it was quite neat to see the kids' excitement roaming around the pasture with scissors and instructions from Lauren and Jolie on how to identify sage at the right stage to harvest and filling up their bags. And they also placed down some tobacco when they harvested as a way to say thank you to the plants. And that was something I had never heard of before. So that was great for me to learn about that. It was a really good day. So moving forward, we are still in the process of figuring out the logistics of this art project and if it will be possible or not. But Lauren has been back out to the farm and identified specifically which boulders he would like to use in the project, and also laid down some tobacco for the boulders as well. We have the equipment lined up and to transport the boulders to Regina, and we have a tentative date for December 6th. So prayers for good weather and no equipment impediments would be welcome. So if it all goes according to plan, which is a big if, by next spring, you'll be able to go to Regent Park in Regina and see one of the results of the Treaty Land Sharing Network. But if something gets in the way of this project, the relationship that I've built with Lauren and his family is a very positive outcome from the network. I want to take just a moment here to point out that in my few limited experiences of what land sharing could look like, this is not zero sum, as I think we might tend to assume. What I mean by that is this is not a situation where one side gains and the other side loses and it comes out to zero in the end. Think about what I've gained. I've gained an enhanced conception of my relationship to the land. I've gained knowledge about our farm. I've gained relationships with some great people, and possibly the opportunity to visit a park in Regina and feel intimately connected to a work of art there. And what have I lost? Sage, which quite frankly, I wasn't using. And, there's more and it will grow back. And some boulders, which I had no plans for and were kind of in the way. So I'm ahead. Hopefully the land users consider themselves ahead. This is much more than a zero-sum transaction. So I mentioned earlier about the farm signs that have been distributed. I picked up 2 of them and will sheepishly admit that they are still sitting in my shop waiting to be put up. I just have to pound some posts and hang the signs, but that will happen very soon. You have my word. But I will also admit that there is some trepidation on my part. You know, I'm not entirely sure what my neighbors are going to think about this, and I anticipate a few difficult and uncomfortable conversations. But ultimately, I have to ask myself if I believe strongly enough in this endeavor and in the treaty rights of Indigenous people to access and use the land to have those uncomfortable conversations. The answer to that is unquestionably yes. But admittedly, it's still hard. What is helpful to know is that I'm not alone. There's a growing number of landholders willing to stand up and put their flag in the ground, or to use a less colonial phrase, to put up their sign. And that's another great element of the network. I've not only built relationships with Indigenous land users, I've also been able to get to know, to support, and to be supported by some like-minded landholders. And my hunch is there might be a lot more of us out there than I originally assumed. So I could talk for much longer about the network, but I will have to leave it there today as I'm out of time. And like I mentioned, I do need to head off shortly for a prior commitment. I would have loved to have stuck around for Celeste's and Mark's presentation. But I look forward to watching the recordings. I'm glad the session is being recorded and learning more about all the exciting work that you guys are doing. And again, Nettie and Naomi will be around for the Q&A and can answer questions about the network at that time. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Joel. That was great. I have myself been really interested in this topic, wanting to learn more as I build community around my farm, how to be that inclusive. So thank you very much. Enjoy your family event, and we'll see you again, I'm sure. Thank you.